Well, I guess perhaps one of the, for starters, what I'd like to point out is that as a First Nations person, I can't speak for all First Nation people, but all of the people that I have been in contact with over the years, um, we have, you know, we have this responsibility. We talk about an inherent right. We've always argued that we have an inherent right to the land, but we also have an inherent responsibility. And that inherent responsibility is to protect that land and to look out that land. And it doesn't mean that we don't understand and appreciate the fact that there are going to be some footprints in order for to have an economy and in order to be able to support and sustain people. However, we have a responsibility to ensure that the footprints are minimum. And, you know, I haven't talked to any Aboriginal person in my 40 years plus of involvement in the movement. I haven't talked to any one person who enjoys standing out on the picket line or having demonstrations or challenging authorities or having confrontation with the general public or confrontation with the authorities. I haven't found one person yet who enjoys this. This is something that is done out of absolute frustration and in most cases in a belief of necessity, because there seems that there's no other way to get your message out there other than to be politically militant. If militants are not brought into as an action, it seems that your voice is unheard. So that's a concern that I have had my entire lifetime, is how do we address the issue of protecting the future for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. So for openers, Fred, that's kind of my introductory to what I'd like to talk about.
It sort of reminds me like one, it actually came out of Connie's video, right? A statement, and I had to, and you were talking about it, I think, and I had to ask people about it because I didn't understand. And that's like the Mi'kmaq concept of 7 generations.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yes, yes. Well, it's a concept of responsibility. I think we understand the fact that it's not impossible to experience, and I've been very fortunate in my lifetime because I've experienced the living of 5 generations, like my dad, myself, my son, my granddaughter, and my great-grandson. And we were very fortunate to be able to have photos taken and to be able to be able to congregate in a celebration and all of these type of things. So it's very special. My understanding and my teaching of the Indian philosophy is that it would be practically not impossible, but practically impossible to experience that same jubilant enjoyment with 7 generations. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the same type of responsibility. We should have responsibility to ensure that the 7th generation will experience the same type of joy and opportunity that we were able to experience in life. So by setting our target as caring for the land, because we are caretakers, we're not owners. By setting our targets of caring for the land, we're actually setting that goal, setting the mark very, very high for ourselves. Because we're not saying we need to preserve it for our children, or our grandchildren, or our great-grandchildren, or our great-great-grandchildren. We're saying we need to preserve it for 7 generations, which is setting the benchmark very much higher than most people can imagine.
Yeah, and I find this very interesting in a world of mainstream governance where 4 years seems to be the maximum that anybody's willing to think ahead. How do you think if like we were talking just a bit how the French people, when they came to from Europe, first Eastern Canada, how they mixed with the Mi'kmaq and how they actually adopted a Mi'kmaq style of governance instead of the the seigneur style of the Europeans. How do you think do you think that a Mi'kmaq governance would affect the environment, or what would be the environmental kind of how would that differ from the current, do you think?
Yeah, well, I see two questions there. One, first of all, is how and why the French people were so intrigued by the system that the Mi'kmaq had, and certainly they were quite willing to adopt it. One, first of all, is that there's no question about it. It was out of absolute necessity. They had left the land whereby starvation or confrontation with English or whatever the case may be moved them from the locations where they themselves had evolved and had carried on their lifestyle. When they moved into the Mi'kmaq territory, they moved into a territory very much aware that there was already a structure in place. There was already a system of government, and what they saw is they saw something that was working quite well. They saw something that the focus for economy was based on survival, not on perception of what you want. It was based on what you need, and that's how Mi'kmaq people govern themselves. The other thing about it is that Mi'kmaq people pursue, whether it was through the times and the only opportunities, or if it was part of their philosophy, which that part of it would be questionable. But what they did is they pursued a lifestyle of developments of the renewable resources. So if you cut a tree, you know a tree is going to grow back. If you take a fish, you know that there's other fish there to replenish and to replace. So all of the activities of the Mi'kmaq people were based solely on not raping the land, but on utilizing the land out of necessity. This is why this is why I believe that this is why they were so nomadic, because one particular area could only sustain a number of people for a certain period of time. And one of the examples of how our people lived by being a very migrant people can still be experienced if we study another species on the earth. And the caribou is a prime example. Caribou will forage in one particular area, but as the food become threatened, they'll migrate, they'll move, they'll go elsewhere, and then they'll forage in that particular area, and probably the area that they left may replenish itself, and in 20 years you may see them back in that particular area. And that was very much the way of our people. Instead of raping a resource until it was totally depleted, they utilized what was absolutely necessary to a point whereby it needed to replenish, and then they moved elsewhere.
Which is sort of related to what's happened in the fishery in Newfoundland.
Very, very much so in Newfoundland. If you looked at the history of Newfoundland and all of its little outports and communities, what you'll find is that Newfoundlanders, unknowingly to themselves, had very much adopted a Mi'kmaq lifestyle. Many of the small outports of Newfoundland adopted what could be very much termed as a Mi'kmaq lifestyle, because they were very conscious of the resource that they needed to survive. They congregated in small groups. That's why we have so many communities around the perimeter of the island. And they went in areas that was accessible for the small boats that they needed at the time that they became engaged into the fishery here on the island of Newfoundland. And all of those things combined was very similar to the way the Mi'kmaq people pursued their lifestyle and their supporting economies.
I think there's probably like in a way a big movement today towards people rejecting maybe or not wanting the very kind of complicated urban lifestyle that is so prevalent. And there are a number of people who are looking for a simpler style of life, a life that's closer to what you were talking about in Upward Rock. Do you think that's possible to them?
I, it is possible because and particularly if we talk about Newfoundland, let's talk about the province of Newfoundland. The geography of Newfoundland is such that it can support that type of a lifestyle. It's bureaucracy and government that forces the congregation of population and want to create larger towns and which will evolve into cities and that type of stuff. And understandably so. That's done because the cost of providing the kind of services that these larger centers require, providing that kind of services to a smaller community such as Flat Bay or Ramia or Burjo or Grey River or any of those areas is not practical. The revenue stream is just not there to be able to do that. However, if you look back on the history of the people who lived in those areas and who survived in those areas, they were very comfortable in determining their own lifestyle and their wants and their needs. What happened is that a different attitude was imposed on those people. Okay, and once you impose an attitude on somebody, or once you suggest that their lifestyle that they have is not appropriate in this day and age, that they need to enhance that to a different level of degree, then of course they're going to become more demanding. So they're going to want the same things in a community in Flat Bay or a community in the Highlands or a community in Grey River. They're going to want the same services that somebody in the outskirts or close to the city of St. John's has. But it wasn't by their wishes or by their doing. It was a philosophy that was imposed on those people. And once that philosophy is imposed, of course the mindset becomes that, yes, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a contributor, and I should expect no less. But it wasn't demanding. I recently, when I was president of the local service district, or the Red Board, Regional Economic Development Boards, I had opportunity to spend time in Grey River and also spend some time in Francois. And sitting down and talking with those people, like I was totally amazed of how comfortable they were with the lifestyle that they had. And sure, there was a cost associated, but the greatest cost that was associated was transportation. But they didn't want it every day. They wanted it when they needed it, and medical service. There wasn't any hospital there, so if there was an emergency, people had to be evacuated by helicopter. But if you look at the cost of running a hospital versus the cost of having a helicopter, even if it had to go in once a week to pick up a patient, and that would be at its most extreme because people were quite willing to be serviced their medical needs by a nurse practitioner. But if you looked at the cost of running a hospital versus going in there with a helicopter to pick up a severe case of illness, there is no comparison whatsoever. There's no comparison. It's the math is there. I mean, it's so simple. But that's what happened with most of rural communities in Newfoundland. That's what happened with a lot of the Aboriginal communities. I worked in Labrador with the Aboriginal movement back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when they were taking people from their homeland and congregating them into communities, taking them away from the bush and putting them into communities. They did that in a number of communities. And I remember going to Hopedale when they had all this string of houses that they built with Canada Mortgage and Housing and Newfoundland Labrador Housing, I guess, in partnership, build those housing, and took people out of the bush and put the people in those housing without any training whatsoever of how to be able to deal with a flush toilet or a leak under your sink or whatever the case may be. Well, in no time at all, those houses were in deplorable condition because the people who were put into them had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of the kind of skills that you require for the upkeep of a modern home. These were people who born on the land, lived on the land, and survived quite well on the land. Whose decision was it to move those people? It wasn't the decision of the people. It was the decision of somebody else who looked at those people and said, oh, they're in deplorable conditions, we have to move them. Well, from my perspective, they took them out of very comfortable lifestyles and put them into deplorable conditions, you know. But that's the mindset of society. If I own a Cadillac and you own a Chevette, you're not as good as I am. So I need to find a way to get you to be able to buy a Cadillac. But it's the mindset of the people who have the most, not of the people who are satisfied with what they have.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I think it's actually happening that is when I was referring to simple living, I think maybe there's a new consciousness evolving. And it kind of reminds me of reading in the book when the French first came to Port Royal, and I think it was about 1600, and they were befriended by the Mi'kmaq, Membertou, I think was the chief then. And then the French went back to France, and I think they're gone about 2 years, and they left everything to Membertou to take care of, right, and his people, and said, you can, go into our fort and live in our fort, in our stone buildings and that kind of stuff. And when the French came back, the Mi'kmaq they took total care of the place, but they didn't move into that fort. It's those dark little European style living. They continued to live on the land where they had traditionally lived, and that they could also have a nomadic lifestyle. And they wanted nothing to do with that European. So maybe through a kind of a different consciousness of living close to the land, and maybe that can actually happen.
I think it can. However, what needs to happen is that the mindset of the people themselves who are going to pursue that lifestyle has to change. Because one of the things that is, and some of the examples, and I won't use communities, but I will use examples. Some of the examples I've seen whereby people are moving away from the cities and building themselves cabins. They call them as cabins, but then they're looking to live in those areas for permanent periods of time. One of the things that is that they have not changed their mindset. They have not changed their mindset to accept the fact that once you do that, you have to be acceptable to changing your lifestyle. So if I live in the city of Corner Brook and I'm going to build a cabin in Georges Lake because I no longer want to live in the congested rat race of a city, and I say that with no malice, then I'm going to have to realize that I have the opportunity to make some big changes. And perhaps a little garden in my backyard, and perhaps cutting my own firewood, and perhaps picking my own berries and doing these kinds of stuff are the kind of a mindset that I have to be willing to take with me in that move from the city life to the country life. Okay, but if I build my cabin out there equivalent to the home that I have, and I demand a street light after the first year, and I want to make sure that the fire truck shows up when my barbecue catch fire, then I've not done anything for myself, or I haven't done anything that will evolve into a protection of the environment. Because what I've done is I've placed more responsibility on the government agencies to deliver a service that costs much more if I live in Spruce Brook than if I lived in Corner Brook. So as I place responsibilities on the government to provide services to me that I'm going to make it more difficult for government to be able to produce, then I'm going to put pressure on government to raise its capital income. I'm putting pressure. So therefore, we can talk all we want about the dangers of fracking, but if we say to government we want everything, then the government has to find a way to generate revenue. And if it has exploited all of the rest of the things that are there, or the majority of the things that are available, then it's going to have to also be engaged into some of the undertakings that are going to be most destructive to our land and to our environment. So it's the mindset of the people. You know, I can't be an environmentalist and want everything that I see advertised on television. I have to be very restrictful on what my wants are and accept my needs to become a true environmentalist, or even to become a true proponent of protecting our land for the next 7 generations as a Mi'kmaq person.
Do you think that, like one of the things that you mentioned earlier, how there's not a hospital in Francois or Grey River, and do you think that perhaps there's actually less need for a hospital in a rural community where people are living a very healthy lifestyle?
Oh, definitely. Oh, there's no question about it. I was very much aware of that long before I went to Francois. But sitting in Francois and talking with the people that was there, it was like, you know, they have absolutely no fear of the fact that there's not a doctor there, you know. And on the other hand, I've experienced whereby I've had friends of mine come from the city of Toronto or even from Halifax and come to Flat Bay, and they were panic stricken because we were a half hour away from a hospital, and that was a half hour driving time, where people in Francois have absolutely no fear whatsoever of living in a total isolated community away from the hospital. And I know exactly how they feel, because until the late 50s, Flat Bay was a similar community. We were totally isolated, and the only way out of here was by boat or by the passenger train, CN, that passed through the community once a day. But there was never any fear, and people developed a consciousness about healthy living because they know these things. And the other thing about it is that you know, if you have access to something, you're going to utilize it as much as possible. If it's not there, my grandfather was to tell me, you'll never miss what you don't have, you know. And for the longest time, I elaborate a little bit more on that question, because for the longest time I've been an advocate of having a nurse practitioner to visit and tend to the needs of the people in the Flat Bay area. And I talked about that in the context that we would help prevent some of the congestion that takes place in the hospital in Stephenville, you know, because many times, and rightfully so, you can't blame people. I was a young parent myself. I raised 6 children. If you have a child that is running a fever, and if you can jump in the car and get that child to a doctor, you're going to do so. However, in the Francois case, they can't do that, so they have to deal with it in their own way. Here in the community of Flat Bay, what I had been suggested, and what I still suggest today, is that a nurse practitioner could eliminate the transportation costs to Stephenville, the congestion of that waiting room, and the overload on the doctor that takes place, just by having somebody in the community who could tend to some of the minor situations that take place. The other thing that could very well happen is that the preventive aspect of health care would be there. You know, in most cases, senior people don't want to be bothered with going for regular checkups and going to the doctors, whatever the case may be. So in most cases in my lifetime, what I've seen is in our community is that you see an ambulance backing into the door of a senior. So what happens is that that senior has not been monitored for the last 10 years of their aging life, and all of a sudden they have a severe attack of whatever the case may be, whether it's heart or whether it's sugar, whatever the case may be. But the only time it's dealt with is when it becomes very, very severe, whereby a nurse practitioner would be monitoring that person. The preventive precautions would be taken. So you know, I guess the point that I'm trying to make, because we are talking about environment, is that we can't rule out any and all of those discussions when we talk about protecting the environment. Because the more demands we put on the government agencies, the more demands they have to put on the earth in order to extract or whatever, with regard to raising the revenue to be able to take care of the needs of the people. So as our needs and our wants increase, so will the demands on Mother Earth.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit complicated because so many people in rural areas now live an identical lifestyle to a person in the city, right? Like, you know, don't go out of the house unless you hop in your car and watch television all the time, that sort of thing. But it seems to me that, like, I go to a lot of rural communities and it's quite common to hear about people being like over 100 years old, and, you know, it's like all over the place. People live long lives, right? And it seems to me that that has to be part of living an active life.
Yes.
In a place where you have to live an active life.
Well, we have a couple of examples here in our community. We have a couple of people who are in their late 80s. We've had people that went well in their 90s, and you know, the people that live, our elders in our communities that are in their late 80s, like 87, 88, 89, they are people that have lived a very, very active life, and they're still very active yet for their age. So you know, there's no, there should be no question about it. I mean, no, you know, if any doctor I've ever visited in my lifetime, anybody that I've ever been involved with to run any kind of medical programs will tell you that exercise is one of the very most important aspects of living. And when you live in a rural setting, you know, exercise becomes part of your daily routine, especially if you're involved in the kind of activities that should continue the survival of that community. You know, gardening, and, you know, go for a walk on the beach, berry picking, you know, fishing, all of these things. You know, recreational fishing, salmon fishing. You know, all of those things require mobility. They require walking. So these are the things that will continue to support your health.
I remember taking my kids down. I was working down to Franceway and Grey River, and they were very young at the time, say 6 and 8, something like that. And wherever we went, people were taking care of them. Like Liam would be out on a dock fishing, somebody helping him fish. Faye would be picking berries on the hill, and one place that I went to, Grand Britt, did get resettled. And I remember asking Cindy, because we stayed there as well, why, and stuff like that. And she said, well, it got lonely last Christmas, right? And so it seems to me that in a healthy living in a traditional community, a person's personal health is probably determined almost as much by the cohesion of the community and how people actually get together and do things together.
That's a given. There's absolutely no question about that. And we found that out here in the community. You know, the excuse me, because we live in close proximity now to the larger centers, and because of the conditions of the highways, and because mostly everybody have a car, you find yourself more mobile and spending more time out of the community, out of necessity than out of anything else. You know, all of your shopping has to be done away from the immediate community. All of your medical needs is from the immediate community. If you want to get involved in entertainment, that's away from the community. But what we found is that the community center that we have here in Flat Bay is the focal point for congregation. Like, you know, people will, you know, they have a men's dart lead, and you have a ladies' dart lead, and then you have a youth dart lead. And that's one opportunity whereby people can come together, and you have more of an intermix of people, because people don't mix anymore, because we've become so private and so dependent on the kind of entertainment that we have in our living room. You know, we just switch to the channels, and some of us are addicted with what's happening in other parts of the world. So we don't spend any time interacting, not even with our immediate families, not only with our extended relatives and our friends. But these kind of activities bring people together. Excuse me. They also place demands on people that require them to be interactive and be together. Because, for instance, you know, like, everybody enjoys the community center because it serves for a recreation of the community. It's also there for people to be able to to come together for an expressions of sympathy when somebody is lost in the community. You know, immediately after the funeral, people will go to the community center. Food will be served, and you know there'll be a feast, and people will be there, and it's an opportunity for you to be able to show the kind of support that you need to show to the grieving family. So the community center has its purpose. But beyond that, in order for that community center to survive, there has to be fundraising, because there's a cost associated with keeping that center. So the fundraising, again, becomes another opportunity for people to congregate, whether it's a bingo or a variety show or whatever the case may be. So the center itself is a very, very important component of socializing in the community for whatever reason.
Yeah, indeed. I've been sort of throwing questions at you, which I really didn't intend to do.
No,
and I'm sure
good.
that you yourself had more in mind when you're talking about your concerns about the environment and conservation.
Yes, well, almost certainly. However, like, you know, I tried to make the case that all of those things that I did talk about all have a bearing on the need of utilizing the resources that are out there. You know, and I'll even go back a bit onto that. You know, we talk about the Francois and the Grey Rivers and all of those other communities. You know, had the focus not been removed from the fishing industry and more focus on more focus on the extracting of minerals and oil, I believe that a lot of those communities could and would have survived much longer than they had and they will. But what happened was that there was a period of time whereby and still yet today, there's this feeling that big is better, and big is not always better. You know, the factory freezer trawlers, you know, and the OCIs and all of that type of stuff. Yes, it's good, but it's good for a minimum amount of people. Where the fishery that Newfoundland was built on is a mom and pop operation. It's small business. It's small enterprises. And it's not enterprises that need to invest $2 million for $1 million return, which down the road created a lot of headaches for a lot of people and put people in a situation whereby only a few could survive. And in order for that few to survive, they had to become very selfish and very greedy. They had to have control of the majority of the stocks. So it was pressure from the top down that eroded all of those communities. That's what took away the lifestyle of a man and his son who was prepared to get up 4 o'clock in the morning and go out and come in with his day's harvest for $100, because he only needed 75 of that money to survive. The other 25 could become his income, his disposable income. But that was eroded by the need for the bigger operations to be able to harvest. In that respect, what happened is the responsibility of conservation practices was lost, and people again raped the ocean floor. So there was no consideration for environment whatsoever. It was, you know, the more I can catch, the more money I can make, and so that trickled down to the erosion of a lot of the lifestyles in the rural areas, fishing communities of Newfoundland.
I was on a Caribbean island once, and I was traveling with a rural development officer. Of course, we're doing community radio there and stuff. And he said, "Look at that big house on the hill." He said, "We can't afford that big house on the hill, right? We're a poor community." And that man with the big house on the hill is actually taking away from the rest of us, because his concept was all of us moving ahead together, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and that's the example that I was trying to make of what happened in Newfoundland, in rural Newfoundland, with regard to the fishery. Uh, and now we're we're at a time in our life in 2015 onward, whereby not only in Newfoundland, but I guess in the entire world, where people are going to have to realize that we're going to have to take better care of the environment, because as we continue to rape and deplete, um, the pot that is there is getting smaller and smaller, and the destruction is getting bigger and bigger. And where does it stop? Like, when is somebody willing to be able to say, well, enough is enough? I've taken, I've drilled enough holes in the earth. I need to let that replenish. I need to let that heal. If there are any such things as healing after you've drilled for oil, or after you've fracked a couple of thousand square miles, is there any healing? We don't know the answer to those questions. We know that there's healing of what we do on the surface. We know that if we cut timber, that timber will grow back. We know that if we pick berries, that berries will grow back. We know that if we catch fish, and if we do it in moderation, that they will replenish. We know that if we hunt animals, that they will also replenish. So we know all of the things, and we have all of the, we have the justification, and we have the answers to what's happening on the earth, but we don't know what's happening in the earth.
I remember, you probably remember Neil Tilley, who was to be
Quite well,
around. Yeah.
quite well.
And I remember talking to Neil, I guess it was shortly before he died, and it was, we were talking about things like this, and he said he'd been down, by the wharf talking to like an older fisherman sort of thing like this, and the guy looked at him, he said, Neil, the problem is greed.
Yep. Oh, there's
Period,
no,
right?
there's no question about it. I'm very conscious of that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure that there's many people who are very conscious of that. Even some of the people themselves who are exercising that greed, they are conscious of exactly what's happening and what they're doing. However, it's a fixation. There's everything in life can become an addiction, and earning money and greed for exploitation is an addiction. The more you got, the more you want. You don't stop anymore, and you may change the perspective from the collection of wealth to the feeling of power, but it's still part of the addiction. The power came because now you have so much wealth that you have this feeling that you can buy anything and whatever you want, including people and decisions in life, and what you want to do and where you want to do it. So there's no question about it. It is greed, and at some point in time, we're going to pay the price for it. There's no question about it. In a lot of places, we are paying the price now, but it's going to get it's going to get more severe. And the other thing about it is that if you look at the people who are driving the greed, don't think for 1 minute. I'm not going to fool myself to believe that their attitudes will change. Their attitudes will not change. Their attitudes will get stronger as they become more empowered with their money, and therefore, not only will we see, if we allow this to continue, not only will we see the trickling down of the effect of their greed impacting our way of life, we'll actually see their power affecting our way of life, because it'll come to a point, if it's not already there, where they will exercise no care or consideration for any other human being, because as the resource gets smaller, they'll fight over that resource, and at some point in time, unfortunately, unless we take up a challenge whereby we can start educating people at a very, very early age, I don't think to stop what I and this is all my own personal vision for the future, but to stop this continued greed and effect on human life. I think that the answer is not into roadblocks or demonstrations, or that's not or healing circles or sweat lodges. I don't think that's where the answer is to. I think the answer is getting into the education system. I think we need to change. We need to change the philosophy of a generation of people. We need to be able to get into the schools, into the universities, and I think that some of that is happening. But we need to put a bigger push onto that. We need young people who are the leaders of the future. We need them to come out of there with a totally different perspective. There's not a thing wrong with getting ahead in life and working hard and being ambitious, and when you work hard, you get rewarded for your work. However, we have to start exercising our conscience, and that's one of the things that has been lost. One of the things that has been forgotten is the conscience. Some stockbroker laying on the beach in wherever, looking at his BlackBerry or her BlackBerry to see how much the stocks are today, are not concerned about somebody living on $15,000 a year in any outport in Newfoundland.
Yeah, maybe even one of the things we talked about last time was about basically summer youth camps, cultural youth camps, and to help. It's like guidance. There have to be people. It's almost like when you go into the forest or whatever, people need guides. It's almost like
Exactly.
we need guides again. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. It has to be a kind of a mentorship, and the thing about it is that we need to be able to. I'm optimistic, because in the last number of years, a lot of people that I've come in contact with are environmentally conscious. They have realized that we've gone to a very dangerous peak, and I'm not sure if we're at the peak yet and starting to slide the other way, or if we're just at the peak and we can start pulling back. But there are a lot of people who have that same feeling that I share, but the thing about it is that those people, as well as people, myself and all others who are concerned, we need to become active. We need to instead of crying in our beer, we need to become advocates, and we need to get out. We need to be these mentors, and we need to raise these issues, and we need to do, and not in a confrontational manner, but we need to do it in an educational setting. We need to talk to those people, and we certainly need to talk to our politicians and our bureaucrats who run our provinces and our countries. We need to talk to those people. We need to educate those people. We need to take the focus away from the day you get after the election, you start campaigning to get elected again. We need to remove it from that. We need to get those people who are there to say, well, I'm not here for 4 years. I'm here for 7 years. I need a term and a half. And in those 7 years, or I'm here for 8 years, 2 terms, and in those 2 terms, I am going to contribute to the protection of the environment. I'm going to do something positive for Mother Earth, because it is my 7th generation who I want to protect this for. And we need to get them to adopting. We don't need them running around dancing in our powwows if they're non-Indian people, and we don't need them attending our sweat lodges and partaking in our circles. But we need them to adopt the conscious responsibility that most Aboriginal people share, and that is that we need to protect this for 7 generations, and then the 7th generation will do it, protect it for their 7th generation, and it becomes an evolving responsibility. Because, as I said when we began this interview, I have an inherent right, but I also have an inherent responsibility.